Welcome to the Inner Voice podcast. My name's Jordann Christie. I'm a business owner, vocal coach, and mentor. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My aim with this podcast is the same goal that I have day to day as a musician and an educator, and that is just to take my experiences and share them in the hopes that it helps someone else. If you're a vocalist, business owner, student, parent, or anyone who's interested in singing, I hope you find some information that I share interesting and helpful on your journey. So, a little bit about me. I'm predominantly a vocal coach and have been teaching for over 15 years here in Newcastle. I own and operate a music school called Inner Voice, with over 150 students and about 10 contractors that work within our community at the moment. I have a Bachelor of Music from the Newcastle Conservatorium of Music, a Diploma of Counselling and a Diploma of Sound Healing. I'm still performing and mentoring day to day, and I'm really passionate about what I do. I'm genuinely excited to be here and share some of my experiences. So if it helps just one person, I will be a very happy lady today. Episode 1 of the podcast is just going to be a Q&A style chat. It's just me, which will hopefully provide some insight into my day-to-day and help me share the information that actually interests people. So I've curated some questions that I get asked really regularly and over my career that I've been asked really regularly from students and clients and colleagues and friends. If you enjoy today's episode and you have some questions that you'd like me to answer, please send them in. We will put my social handles and things here so that you can get in touch. So let's jump into the questions for today. The first question I have, and I get asked this a little bit, I just thought it would be a good introductory question for today, is how and why did I name my business Inner Voice? So as I said before, my business Inner Voice is a music school in Newcastle. It was originally named to be able to incorporate my love of mindfulness and sound healing, actually. So the inner part of the Inner Voice was to just kind of make it so that if I want to do some more mindfulness stuff or some sound healing stuff, and funnily enough, I hadn't studied counselling at the time, so it now really works well for the way that we incorporate counselling into our lessons. And I think the general feel that we hope that our teachers and students and community feel when they're around. I rebranded the business from just my name to being called Inner Voice at about 2019. I did a 10 years of teaching celebratory concert and I had some alumni students come and perform there. And aside from me just starting to really struggle with the work from home and life balance, I had worked with some students that I had taught years ago who were at a point in their journeys that they were looking to start to teach. And so I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if they had a really nice place that they could teach from and a mentor in that area? And that's just something I didn't have much of at that time for me. So Inner Voice was born. That was the main motivator for me to go brick and mortar was, I was struggling teaching from home. I'd been there about 2.5 years, kind of hit the ceiling of what I thought I could do in terms of showcases and community engagement from that space. And so Inner Voice was born, and then shortly after, I moved into our first brick and mortar business space. Our first business space was in Hunter Street. It was above the old Tommy Rock building, which coincidentally, we're in the new Tommy Rock building today filming this. We were in Hunter Street for about 2 years. We'd outgrown the space in that time, which was crazy because I signed that lease in February of 2020 and we locked down, I think, in March, or COVID really started to kick off in March. And so we went through all of the lockdown periods in that first space, in that first 2 years. I wasn't able to put staff on as soon as I'd hoped. I had these dreams, did this concert, I'm going to open this space. And COVID hit. So we actually had to pivot really quickly into online lessons and a more of an online community, which luckily that went really well. We outgrew that space while we were there, despite all of that, and we moved to Merriweather, which is where we still are now. We're about 4 years in that space. We moved there about December 2021. It is gorgeous and we love it there. So that is a little bit of the Inner Voice story in a nutshell and why I named it what I named it. The next question that I have to answer is, what is the difference, or why do I call myself a coach instead of maybe a teacher or a tutor? And I get this question when people inquire, just asking what the difference between a teacher and a tutor is, or when they call for a vocal coach. Sometimes I do work with people who just speak, radio presenters and people wanting to look at their vocal health. So I'm going to explain it. I chose this term because I think it helps me to explain my teaching style. It already implies a level of mentorship. Every educator has their own unique style when they're teaching. Even if two coaches or two teachers, two tutors had exactly the same content, they're going to teach it differently. That's just human nature. So the word coach for me implies that it's really practical, it has a lot of demonstration, I sing together a lot, rather than just maybe listening or instructing. So I suppose that kind of helps answer the question. I feel like the word coach also implies a working relationship. So I have a lot of students that are really high achieving. Their goals become my goals, and creating a safe space for anyone to learn does create a bond with the student. So I think that that is just why I tend to call myself a coach rather than a teacher or a tutor. Nothing against maybe a less practical style of teaching. I just teach a lot through feel and a lot through demonstration. The next question that I get asked very regularly by parents, students, all kinds, is practicing and trying to develop a practice regime. So my answer for this is quite varied as well, because I think it comes down to the student individually, and we want to try and tailor that as much as we can. When singers are beginners or they don't have an existing practice regime, I recommend joyful practice. So this is anything that you can maintain for a few weeks to a month at a time. And for some people, having a really strong routine of 3 practice sessions a week really works for them. For some people, they can only find the time on the weekend, and an hour on the weekend is what works for them. So get something that you can do consistently first, and then try and add in more practice or more productive practice. Goals are a huge motivator for practice. So beginners or people who are starting who maybe don't have really structured goals, just trying to do some consistent, joyful practice is great. If you have more structured goals, then your practice regime will really have to reflect that. So I thought we might chat about some habits, maybe some good practice habits and some not so good or some bad practice habits. Let's make it really easy and let's do good practice and bad practice. Not that I would say that any practice is bad. No, I would. We're going to talk about it in a second. But I would say that any practice is valid. But what we want to try and do is maybe outweigh some of the not so great habits with some really great habits. Let's start with some good habits. So this comes along from what I was saying about trying to develop a regime. And this is shower/car practice. So this is super common. I have adult students who they're like, I practiced in the car, dropped the kids off, this is how it went. So I think for most people, car practice and shower practice is really accessible, it's really fun, and it's a really nice place to start. Is it what I would call productive practice? Maybe not, but at least you're singing, at least you're using your instrument. I think that in a lot of ways, just singing more is such a good idea, okay? Because what we're trying to do a lot of the time in lessons, or I talk about a lot in lessons, is identify the parts of our voice that are speech function and then identify the parts that are a bit more of a singing function. So if you're just singing more, regardless of whether it's in the car or in the shower, that's a good thing. Let's talk about productive practice a little bit, because this is really where my good and bad habits are kind of stemming from. Is all practice is valid. Let's get you using your voice. But what I would recommend is smart practice. And that is something that I speak to my students about all the time. And that is just trying to focus on the areas that you're struggling with or that you need to learn a little bit better. So if you're just learning the lyrics, melody, timing, phrasing of a song, just those foundational elements, then yeah, practicing the song the full way and getting to know all those things in a really nice general sense is a great idea. If you're polishing that song and you're just practicing that song top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom, and that is a form of over practicing, that isn't a great habit to get into. I'd put that on the bad habit side over here. And it's a form of over practicing. So running your song top to bottom all the time, not a great idea. The other thing that's not a great idea is practicing that one section over and over and over and over and over again until you get it. I think that yes, we want to be going over elements of our pieces that are more difficult or need a bit more attention. But again, the over practice of those things isn't always a positive thing. What would make it more positive is changing something each time you practice it. If you practice it through and it's not working, you want to change something. And hopefully you're getting some ideas around what you can be doing to improve from maybe your coach or teacher. But if you aren't in that position, then I say this all the time. We want to go by how it feels. How does this section feel? Does it feel like I'm doing those lyrics in rhythm and in time? Does it feel like those high notes are a little bit tight and scratchy? So really just checking in with yourself and how it feels, that will direct you the areas that you want to go over. In saying that, if you're checking in with how you feel all the time and you're over practicing and you're hitting notes again and again, then you might notice that you're over practicing because you are starting to get tired or things are starting to come out a little bit worse and worse. So you might have a break and come back to it later. It's another really good practice habit is to take breaks from practicing. Take a break from your practice session. Have a sip of water. Take a couple of deep diaphragmatic breaths so that the sessions become more productive and more fun and more flowing. Another question I get asked really commonly in social settings. So it'll be a bit of we're at a social event, introducing each other. What do you do? What do you do? I'm a vocal coach. And this question comes out. It is, what do you do when you have a student who can't sing? Someone comes into your room and they are just horrible. And I love answering this question because the answer to that question, in my very humble opinion, is that everyone can sing. I have never, ever, ever had a student in my room that I have not been able to help them improve. I believe everyone can sing. I believe it is the same as learning any other instrument. If that instrument is accessible to you, then anyone can sing, and anyone who wants to sing should sing. I don't mean that everyone should want to sing and everyone should want to be good at it, but I think that singing is just such a wonderful thing to be able to do. It just helps you feel so connected to yourself and your body, and it's so accessible for most people. Most people have the ability to use their voice, so I think it is just such a gorgeous way to express yourself. I disagree with the term tone deaf. Doesn't really make sense in my brain, even for the way that I would teach tone and the separation between tone and pitch. I think when people use the term tone deaf, they mean someone that can't pitch notes, like they can't sing a melody. And tone more relates to the qualities that a voice has, whether it's like warm or pretty or dark or full. Or so I think that the term tone deaf, I'm tone deaf, is also a term that I wholeheartedly disagree with. I think that people have definitely better ears, like oral skills, than others, perhaps when they start. So a bit more of a natural oral ear and ability to hear and match pitch, but that doesn't mean that they can't learn to sing. It sometimes just means that their journey's a little bit longer, or you take a different approach when you're working with them than you would with someone who has a really good natural ear for pitch or tone or timing. The next question that I have here is around performance. So, do I recommend performance for students? How do we get into performing more? The answer to that question simply is yes. I think that performance is a really healthy part of confidence building. And confidence building is really important to me within my lessons, but in Inner Voice as a music school as a whole, we do try to provide opportunities for our students to build confidence. So building confidence through performance is super important, and there's so many reasons for that. You meet new people, you work as an ensemble. Even if you're using a backing track, you've still got to learn skills around listening for your entries, using a microphone, and building up those skills is how we build up our confidence. When we get nervous and we're thinking about all the things that could go wrong, having this pile of things we've done over here, like working with a microphone, performing on a small stage or a big stage, helps us to feel more confident in our ability to execute the performance or whatever it might be. In my experience, I had performed in Eisteddfods and things throughout high school, and I started working in bands not long after I started teaching. So maybe 2011 might have been my first band that I had kind of at university level. I then worked in a pretty long-term project called Vogue, and it was a kind of high-end entertainment functions and weddings band. The repertoire was very challenging. We used tracks, and performing to those and practicing to those was really challenging, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I really developed what I coin now as gig fit in terms of stamina, being able to sing for 3 to 6 hours every gig, and sometimes we would do a couple of gigs a weekend. Another thing that I think performance experience gives us, not just as students but later on perhaps as teachers, is you can bring that experience into your lessons. If I hadn't had been through all of the different bands that I'd been through and performed at that level for that length of time, I don't know where a lot of my insight would come for students who are performing. So that is a really huge part of where I get my experience and insight from in terms of performance and stamina and nerves. And there's just so much that you gain as a performer yourself to be able to pass on to other people. My next question is, when should someone start teaching, or how do they kind of make that transition from maybe being a student themselves and then starting to teach and starting to share what they know? And that's a really interesting question. Again, I think it really depends on the person. At the moment, we have our first junior staff, and these junior staff are 15 and 16, so they're quite young. But those individual students, and they still are students, so they're still being actively mentored by us at Inner Voice. So that's an important thing. I think if you are younger and you're looking to start teaching, I think continuing your own lessons is really important, just so you've got someone to bounce off things and ask questions to. So if you're wanting to start at a young age, I would really recommend trying to work with your own teacher or your own mentor and have some support systems in place. If you're a young adult or an adult a little bit older looking to start teaching, then you've kind of got two options. You can start teaching from home, which is exactly what I did. That was really good for being a lot more relaxed. I was working as well at the time, so that was really good if you're kind of balancing a few different things. If you're wanting to go, quite hard at it and you just, really into your teaching, you really want to give it a good go, then maybe I would seek out somewhere like Inner Voice or another fantastic music school within Newcastle or your local area to try and connect with mentors and people who have been there. Because if this is something that I could have had more of when I was teaching in the schools around Newcastle, I would have loved that, a little bit more direct mentorship. And I've made a few mistakes with that, with my business actually, in that when I first opened, I employed all of my staff. I had been contracted in the past and had bad experiences with that. And so I wanted to employ everyone and envelope everyone and pay them prep and follow up and, just try and really, they all taught from my framework. So it was very, very close, really close knit. And it was really gorgeous. I think that all the staff that worked with me then probably really enjoyed it. But something that we've changed recently is we've moved to a contracting model, which means that our coaches have a lot more freedom in what they're doing. They can use their own branding, their own teaching frameworks, they organise their own schedules, and they're running their own businesses, but with the support of people who have done it for years and been there and can answer their questions and help them with things. So I think that the direction that we're going in at the moment is a really good direction. It's a really accurate depiction of what it's like to run your business, whether it's just you teaching your students or whether it's a bit of a larger business like mine. Running a larger business is also, like, I hate to say it, but it's really hard. It's really hard. There is an incredible amount of sacrifice. We've sold our car. I've borrowed money from my parents. We built a lot of, in both spaces, there was heaps of handiwork that I never expected. There's just so much that goes behind a larger business that if anyone could put off doing that until they're a little bit more established with a student base, I would absolutely recommend that. That was one of the great things that I had going into my brick and mortar. I'd already been teaching for such a long time and I'd moved heaps of different music schools. There'd be students already at that point, at that 10-year concert. I don't think I'd had students for 10 years then, but I've had students for 10 years now that I've been teaching for such a long time. So my community was really strong when I decided to move to a brick and mortar space and kind of split my time between mentoring teachers as well as working with my student load. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about as well. And it's something that we're actively doing all the time and actively so grateful for is how gorgeous and supportive and amazing our community at Inner Voice is. So if you can be part of not just my community, anyone's community, then I would recommend that for sure. A really important thing I've learned so far is that we are learning. So myself and my partner who run Inner Voice, we're constantly learning and we're constantly asking our staff and our students in our community for feedback or advice, or we're constantly speaking to all of them because we're all just learning and there's always things that we can do better and there's always things that are going well and things that maybe aren't going as well. So I think one of the biggest things I've learned is just to be really open to the fact that nothing's going to be perfect and you're just doing the best that you can and trying to really value the feedback and questions and just all the feedback we receive from our community and our staff. I think that something that we did really early on, probably based on my experience again, was that we recognise the relationship that students have with their teacher. As soon as a student works with a teacher, there's going to be a bond. And for that reason, we've never stopped our teachers, whether they're employed or contracted, never stopped them from working other places at the same time, never stopped them from working from home at the same time and building a community there and then also being part of ours. And we've always let those students leave with a teacher who's left if they're able to do so. If that teacher has gone on to teach, we really respect that bond. This actually concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Inner Voice podcast with Jordann Christie. I had so much more I could have spoken about. I've had questions submitted. If you resonated with anything today, if you learnt anything or you enjoyed anything about it, please do like and subscribe for the next episode and submit anything that you'd like to be covered. I had a really great time. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Hi, this is Jordann Christie from the Inner Voice podcast. If you are looking for music lessons in Newcastle or some vocal mentoring, please get in touch. Our website is www.innervoicevocal.com.